Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, co-founder and vice president for research at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. The ANWA Deterrence Center is a 501c3 organization ensuring a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent and its ongoing modernization. Thank you for listening and welcome to the show. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of NucleCast. Of course, I am your host, Adam Lowther, and today Rebecca Grant joins us for an exciting discussion of stealth. It's a great topic, and we cover it every once in a while, but it's about that time because there's a lot going on. So it's a topic that is due for further discussion. Rebecca, welcome to NucleCast.
Glad to be here. And of course, one of my very favorite topics, stealth.
My other favorite topic besides stealth is, of course, the fact that it's opening day for Major League Baseball. So, for those who are listening, you won't see, but I am wearing my best Zach Greinke jersey when he played with Kansas City because I'll be at the game this afternoon. So I'm sure some of our other listeners are big baseball fans. I know you're an O's fan, so it'll be a great day. I'm looking forward. From now to October is my favorite time of the year. So, okay, let's talk stealth. We got a lot going on. B-21's is on track. That's great. We've got we just had the new fighter announced, the Air Force fighter. We've got the F/A-XX that may come out today or some before the end of the week. We've got new Chinese stealth fighters that are they what they're all cracked up to be? There's just a lot going on. So I'm going to hand it over to you. And if you could sort of run down that list and give us an idea of sort of where we are and what's going on.
Well, that's an excellent list, Adam, and look at it all together, and it tells us one thing, and that is we are in the era of sixth generation stealth. And of course, that includes not only the low observability to radar that is the core of stealth design, but now so much more the information flow, the combination with electronic warfare, and the reliance on digital design to move stealth aircraft more quickly from prototype and first flight into production representative vehicles. So sixth generation stealth means so many things, and we'll talk a little bit later. It also means working with drones, and it means using advanced information warfare and networking and a lot of really nifty weapons. And not a moment too soon, because the Chinese are in hot pursuit as well. But let's start with our number one sixth generation stealth aircraft. That, of course, is the B-21 Raider bomber. It has been actually about a decade since the program was awarded to Northrop Grumman. That they won that because of their expertise in building the B-2 bomber, and also because they knew they could produce the B-21 on a budget, which was a key performance parameter from the very beginning. The B-21 rolled out in December of 2022. I was there in Palmdale. It was a great privilege to see it sort of in the evening. It was cloudy and dusky, and the B-21 just looked fantastic. It made its first flight a year later. And what we know now is there are a few B-21s in the flight test program, and several more that are being manufactured. But I think one of the big things with B-21, Adam, and I know you'll want to comment on this too, is it's turning out to be not only on schedule, but it's on budget. In fact, it's actually under budget.
Ooh, when do we ever hear that?
When do we ever hear that? Really, anywhere, at any time. It's just very remarkable, what the Air Force and Northrop Grumman as the prime have been able to do. So cost was a key parameter, had to be a certain amount of dollars per copy. They've stuck to that. But like every major defense system, the COVID inflation spike hit really, really hard. It increased pressure on wages and supplies, not only for the primes, but also for the hundreds of subcontractors. So Northrop Grumman was pretty smart in that they went ahead in late 2023 and kind of just took a one-time charge off that. And then by the spring of 2024, Air Force leadership was ready to announce that they had actually lowered the contract negotiation price for the next 4 lots of B-21, which is, it's several aircraft, lots of aircraft, a few dozen aircraft. Don't know how many exactly, they won't say.
And remind us, for the sake of comparison, the B-21 is going to come in far less expensive than the B-2.
Far less expensive. If you do the brutal math, the B-2 was about $2.2 billion per plane because we only built the 21. The B-21, it's $550 million in 2010 dollars. You round that up, that's about $700 million a copy right now. Adam, if you wanted to go buy yourself a 787 or a 747, you'd spend several $100 million on a commercial plane coming off the line. So it's a pretty reasonable cost. And what's really remarkable is the Air Force has said that they lowered the unit cost on the B-21s in the LRIP lot production negotiations without reducing the quantity. And you look at their fiscal year 2025 budget, they had about $1 billion that they planned to spend on B-21 procurement. I'm not talking military construction, all that other stuff, just on procurement. They were able to actually turn that back, and they execute in 2025 for $1 billion less. And Aviation Week says that over the FYDP, the 5 years on from 2025, the Air Force has actually bagged about 28% savings on the B-21 line. Just incredible. And what a contrast to all the snarls in nuclear shipbuilding that we're seeing in that leg of the trident.
It's interesting because this is really the way it should be, right? Whenever you build a new generation, and the B-21 is a fundamentally better aircraft in every single way than the B-2. The maintenance is less, the stealth coatings are, but everything's better. The only potential downside is it carries fewer bombs, but it's a little less capacity. But you're finally taking advantage of past experience, past learning, and producing a better product at a lower price, which we never seem to be doing in defense acquisition. So the B-21 is really kind of a stellar program that I don't think people fundamentally understand that this is actually a good news story.
It is, and full credit to the Air Force and the Rapid Capabilities Office that designed this in from the start. But we're also reaping the benefits of very mature technologies. 40 years ago in the Reagan years, the Air Force was asking for big changes in the B-2, demanding low-altitude flight. Now Lieutenant General Dick Schofield, who ran the program, used to go see Reagan's Defense Secretary, Caspar Weinberger, every 3 months. And frequently he had to go in and ask for some more money, which the Reagan team gave him, of course. But B-21 is just a completely different story, as it should be, because they're drawing on lessons from the B-2 a long way back, but also Northrop Grumman Building Center Section F-35, all the experimental aircraft, and just the ability to use digital design to control and contend with issues that pop up. There was an issue that popped up in 2021 regarding the engine inlets. There was a redesign that had to be done on, I think, kind of the first 2 B-21 articles. And they did it real quick. It was just not a problem, and it didn't delay the program or add to the cost. So that's the aerospace manufacturing world that we're living in. And B-21 is really reaping the benefits. And I'm telling you, Adam, that's giving the Trump administration a lot more confidence in all the 6th-gen programs. They look at B-21 and say, wow, they're executing. This is not going to be, a big blow-up problem. And that gives them confidence, I think, on F-47 and then also on this pending Navy carrier fighter that we hear is to be announced very, very soon.
Yeah, and hopefully we're learning from, F-35 was an expensive aircraft because we built something in every congressional district. Are we learning with, the F-47, the new Navy aircraft that, we don't have to build this, one size fits all with slight modifications kind of aircraft. Can we go back to the way we did things before where, different services had different purposes, different parameters. They flew under different conditions, and therefore that's okay, and we can build for those. Is that something that we're sort of going back to, or how do you see this playing out?
Oh, yes. No one wants to duplicate the experience of the Joint Strike Fighter program. As I often say, the F-35 is great. It's fantastic. It's the program that was such a problem. And so we see now a very different approach with the Air Force having developed the F-47 and the Navy very separately developing a very different carrier-based aircraft. And this is smart because each service has been working on that program for, about 10 years and looking at their own requirements within their own budget. So that's a big lesson learned from F-35. We're also seeing, a tremendous advance in materials. For example, the aerospace grade carbon fiber composites. They used to make up just a little teeny bit of a commercial or a military aircraft, but now with F-47 and B-21, and in the commercial world, we are often seeing examples of composites being used in place of metal structures. And, we have great aerospace manufacturing here in the U.S., and the firm, you may not have heard of it, but Hexcel is our leading aerospace-grade carbon fiber manufacturer. It's all U.S. supply chain, fabulous. They're on, 100 different defense programs. So we have some great American technologies that are expanding and growing, and that is helping with B-21 and with all the sixth-generation aircraft, I think.
Do you think we're seeing a trend across, because aircraft have gotten, in general, just a lot more expensive, and they take longer, and we moved in the wrong direction for a long time. Do you see that we've learned our lesson and we're now sort of moving in the right direction, and that aircraft, the production will be faster, the costs will come down? Is that the direction, with the F-47 and the Navy's fighter? Do you think, we'll sort of see this, trend that we've kind of overcome the hump?
Yes, I think we have. And in addition to setting up your requirements and production, the other big risk, of course, is the Washington funding lines. That was a big issue on F-35 when the decision was made to test the Marine Corps aircraft first, and all the wobbling that went on for policy reasons. So I was happy to see when President Trump announced the F-47 award to Boeing and the Boeing team that he also let I believe it's almost a $20 billion contract. And I think he even said something along the lines of, well, it's not cheap, but it's going to be the capability that we need. Look, we know air dominance is priceless. But in the case of these very advanced aircraft, you get what you pay for. The key is to set up the production schedule like the B-21, where they had very predictable production. They're in a place where they could actually expand B-21 production. But on F-47, they need to give a big order. Trump said he gave an order for, quote, a lot. Okay? He's not going to tell how much they cost because that's too much information given to the Chinese, et cetera. And he's not going to say how much it is. But he's real clear that we need it. And by giving the correct quantity order that gives predictability and what the program managers most want, which is predictability for their supply chain and for all the investments that Boeing has already made around St. Louis. So I think we have a good chance with F-47 to see production, on schedule.
Yeah, that's going to be good. And, the great thing about F-47 is, we're keeping 3 primes sort of in the combat aircraft building game. We want to have Lockheed and Northrop and Boeing in the game. Otherwise, if we narrow this to and we're down to Northrop and Lockheed, that would not necessarily be a good thing. So it's good to see that we're continuing to build aircraft, and hopefully Boeing, they're not going to, the primes are not going to share in terms of, lessons learned, but hopefully they'll all, sort of get better and better as they, build these new aircraft. So that's a good news story. Now, I do want to shift and ask you, well, you know what? It's about that time of the show where we have to take a quick break. So we'll do that now. And then when we come back, I want to talk Chinese stealth and where the Chinese are. And we can even throw in PAC-FA and talk about the Russians. and radars. If you want to talk radars, because the Chinese have the most dense radar network in the world, and so I'm always interested to know if we're going to reach that point where stealth technology is sort of overcome, because it's either stealth or speed. It's kind of one of the two. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back, and we've got more for you. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. And we're back. Okay, Rebecca, I sort of tossed a big question over to you. So let's start with the Chinese and what they're building. I mean, it's kind of, for those who have seen the picture, it's a unique airframe. It's got some interesting lines on it. Tell us about that and what your take of it is.
Well, the scariest thing of all, of course, is China has, not one, but two new stealth aircraft that they've already flown. They call them sixth generation. I think our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Alvin, has sort of said, that's not really sixth gen in his point of view. And I'm sure he's right about that. But nonetheless, these are big advances from China. So the first one, which is being called the J-36, and the J-36 flew with a J-20 chase plane. So the experts were able to analyze the size and try to learn a little bit more about it. It's sort of like, it reminds me in a way of the now retired U.S. Air Force F-111. It's bigger than, say, our F-15, F-22, and it's got that delta wing that is for a lifting body so that it's got range. So I like to think of the J-36, for what we know about it now, as sort of a fighter bomber. Experts think it has 3 engines. How interesting, which tells me, of course, that maybe the Chinese aren't quite all there with their engine technology. You believe the U.S. engine makers are still pretty far ahead of their Chinese counterparts. So the J-36 is one. The other is a little more mysterious, the J-50. It did not fly with the chase plane, so we weren't clear on some of the other aspects about it, at least in the public domain, anything I've seen. There are even some questions about whether it was manned or not, but I think expert analysis of the smaller J-50 has noted that there's sort of a groove down the center line, and the J-50 may be a prototype 6th generation carrier-based Chinese stealth fighter. Scary, scary, scary.
And so, this is our pacing thread, of course, is China. And, as you know, we're all discussing, is there going to be conflict over Taiwan? And of course, that'll be for, a conflict that's primarily for the U.S. Navy and the Air Force. And, it's all about air power. So whether it's Navy or not, air power is going to play a critical role. And so talk to me a little bit about where you see the U.S., relative to its, to the Chinese, because the Chinese have far more fighters, but they have a much larger low mix, whereas we have, sort of 4th and 5th gen fighters. Where are we in terms of this potential conflict? And is our capability such that even if numbers on our side, the capability sort of compensates for that? How do you see things playing out?
Yes. Well, as you point out, the Chinese have, I believe, about 2,400 combat aircraft, fighters and bombers, mostly fighters. That's not including their trainers or drones. As you say, a lot of that is a low mix that's not equivalent to our F-15, F-15EX, or certainly not to our F-35s. But they do have, and they are producing more J-20s than we've seen in the past. Of course, China has home field advantage. And Adam, as you said, that very dense radar network, along with all the other things that they do. So their goal is to complete their long-range kill chain. And unfortunately, the Chinese long-range kill chain is to reach out and hit U.S. aircraft, tankers, fighters, bombers, and to hit U.S. ships. So in a way, China doesn't have to have as many fighters or as good of fighters as ours, because they are playing on the home field. What we bring, of course, is, I think, just a really different concept. Remember, the concept of stealth behind the B-2 was not that the Russians weren't going to, or the Soviets at the time, weren't going to try to go after it, but that they would just not be able to make the intercept around that big border because of the tactics as well as the technology. Move that forward to today, and it's still a combination of tactics and technology. And we've been talking about that technology. The tactics, you hear the Air Force discuss it too. They want to make that battle space in the beginning, really complicated. They want to use CCAs. They want to use, some version of replicator drones to put more in that battle space, and then have the B-21 able to penetrate and accomplish missions, the F-47 able to penetrate and get in and do certain tasks. And, President Trump said, he implied in his Oval Office remarks that the F-47 may have Mach 2 speed. I mean, who knows? I'm sure he saw the briefings, right?
Yeah.
But it is a maneuverable, penetrating aircraft designed, I think, for some high altitude work, as is the B-21, right? So when we see B-21 getting in there and penetrating, but it's a different concept. It's not about flattening and leveling every surface-to-air missile system. It's about putting all the elements together at the right time to target and hold at risk, and then to chip down enough of China's defenses that the U.S. and allies are able to do the restrike capability that's necessary to either accomplish missions or to really have good, strong conventional deterrence in the Pacific. So the 6th gen and stealth technologies are still really key, but so are the tactics and the additional systems, of course, including drones and collaborative combat aircraft too.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been concerned about with F-35, I was writing about this in, 2013, range is a big concern. So, and, I think I saw here recently that we're going to have our first stealth refueler, and it's a drone refueler. Is that going to be what enables F-35 to have the legs in the Pacific that it's going to need, or is, that's, and then is the F-47 going to have the legs that it needs for this? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, we are told by General Alvin, Air Force Chief of Staff, that the F-47 is going to have significantly longer range than the F-22. And if you notice the picture that came out, we see the cockpit area, we see, the nose, if you will, and we don't see very much else about the F-47. I'm certainly not going to get a look at the trailing edge or the wing shape. And that tells me that it probably is sort of a delta wing, and it is really shaped for additional range. So I think that's going to be important. The question about the tankers, we're going to need KC-46s for a long time. We see the Navy actually fielding a drone refueling tanker. I suspect it does some ISR work while it's not delivering gas to the fleet. And this is, of course, the MQ-25. It's been in test and will join the Carrier Air Wing for the first time this year in 2025. It's a very significant capability for them. The Air Force has considered a stealthy tanker. We don't know where that has fallen out in the budget, if they're going to go forward with that, or if there's going to be another concept. But range, as you say, is important. But I tell you, the Air Force very much has F-35 and F-22, for that matter, in their plans. And the F-35 is going to bring that persistent set of munitions to the battle space for a long time to come as we develop F-47 and as we field more B-21s as well.
So before we bring Bob the Genie out, where are we with the, sort of the future of stealth? It's one of the, I live in Kansas City, so I'm close to Whiteman, and as a guy who spent most of his career with the Air Force, I spent a good bit of time at Whiteman, and Keith Butler, the current wing commander, is a good friend. And so we have good conversations about B-2 and, what we've learned from the B-2 that's now been, those lessons are transmuted into B-21. And so we've learned a lot about stealth technology from our experience with B-2, and that's being incorporated. So no lessons are lost. So can you tell us sort of, where are we in terms of the continued relevance of stealth and what we're doing to make sure that, this is a good investment over the long term, and then it continues to play the critical role it does.
Yes. Well, we're still getting a lot of value out of even the fifth generation stealth that's in the F-35. Example, the Israeli takedown of Iran's Russian-made air defenses. Now, those air defenses are, a step below perhaps what China and even Russia field, but it was very effective in a crisis and did a very, very, very good job with the F-35. So I think, what we've always known about stealth is that it makes that aircraft smaller. And so now stealth is just the entering point. Everything has to be stealthy to start with. You don't really have the option of making a non-stealth design. And then, as you know from just the physics of it, if you also can add electronic warfare to that, you're covering up a smaller target to make it real simple. And that means that it remains relevant. You have to stay on the leading edge of all of that, of course. I mean, it's a constant matter of updating tactics. And of course, this is why we see the Air Force now stepping into that transition to manned, unmanned teaming, so that, to my mind at least, the collaborative combat aircraft, or as President Trump likes to say, drones, mini drones, as many as we want, can help with maintaining that blend of stealth and EW that was designed into the F-22, the F-35, the B-2 as well, and is really at the heart of 6th Gen. Then, of course, 6th Gen, because it is a more networked platform, you can put shooters and electronic warfare zappers and whatnot in different places, and of course pick up information. And that just, I think, greatly adds, the information flow in 6th Gen for those aircraft is revolutionary. Everybody planned initially for the F-22 to just be all there by itself, right? Now it's been modified and adapted. But 6th Gen is going to be there with a team of manned, unmanned, allied, you name it. And that is a huge tactical advantage in keeping stealth relevant.
Yeah, you basically turned all your aircraft into a mesh network that are, transmitting information back and forth. It's sort of, and this is really, you bring this up, and it's really kind of critical to what makes the U.S. Air Force better than the Chinese and the Russians. And it's, maybe they can sort of copy shapes, and they can, they may have some, the actual stealth materials and its maintenance and stuff. But in all of those little areas, we're just a little better, or a little or a lot better than these other guys. So, and then just like you said, kind of the, we were talking about, 5 years ago, joint all domain command and control, and how we're going to integrate everything. And we just have a tendency thus far to stay ahead of our adversaries, which, that's sort of what keeps us, adversaries afraid of us. So, okay, now I'm going to bring out Bob the Genie. And as I rub my magic lamp, Bob grants 3 wishes on the topics we've discussed. So, Rebecca, what is your first wish?
My first wish is that the U.S. stays ahead of China in tech and AI, because in the end, that has military consequences too. Yeah.
I mean, I write about AI in NC3, and so that's been a big issue. But it's ubiquitous, and our adversaries don't have sort of the moral qualms that we do about integration of AI. So this really is a critical thing that you're bringing up. Okay, so tech and AI, anything else you want to add about that? How we're going to stay ahead or anything?
Well, the one way we're going to stay ahead is by letting our private sector companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera, they're the ones who have the cash to invest. They invest 4 times more per year than the federal government does in developing AI. We've got to let them do that work and let them help out the small and medium-sized innovative businesses too.
Okay. So that's a good first wish. I mean, that's, it's one of the 10 things. Those are 2 areas where, China said these are our 10 most important things. So, of course, we've got to stay ahead. Okay, so that's wish number 1. How about wish number 2?
Double B-21 production and set up a second production line. So you've got a bomber that everybody loves. It's under budget. It's doing well. And we've known for a long time, we need at least 200 of these things. So let's build them all now. As President Trump likes to say, let's build a lot. And let's set up a second production line. Also, wouldn't be a bad thing to have that infrastructure resilience of a second B-21 production line.
And let's remind people, let's go back a few short years to 1991. In 1991, we had 300 bombers on alert. Not in total, on alert. And so we don't even have that many total bombers anymore. So the idea of building more B-21s, it's sort of a no-brainer at this point. So that's a great wish. I think Bob is. I'm looking at him. He's already on it. Okay, so your final wish.
Oh, the final one that I have to choose. Oh my goodness. I would like. Okay, I'm going to pick one that we may not have thought about, but we've been talking about all these aircraft. We need more hours for pilot proficiency, not just pilot training, but we need more flying hours to keep the edge. It's nothing without the men and women who fly these aircraft. And then flying these aircraft, yes, a young pilot today may see their career involve a lot of drones and unmanned operations, but this is how they learn the art of American air dominance, and they need the flying hours and the proficiency to go ahead and do this.
Yeah, no, that's that I think, wasn't it last year was the first year that Chinese pilots flew more than American pilots? I think I read that was the case. Is that not true?
Yeah, I believe it's really close now, and it's ridiculous. Our pilots during the Cold War flew probably 3 times as many hours per month, and that they will tell you that is what made them so good. You may have jets that are close, but when your pilot is that much better and that much more proficient. So we need to go ahead and fund the flying hour program for the Air Force and the Navy to make sure that we remain the masters of the sky.
Yeah. And of course, having sufficient numbers of pilots, that would be great too. So that's another one that sort of goes along with it. Okay. So 3 wishes. They were all great wishes. Bob is at work on those wishes. And now as we bring the show to a close, is there sort of a walking away message that you want the listeners to sort of think about as they, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months in the future?
6th Gen is real and it's here to stay. The B-21 has led the way, and now we see that great vote of confidence in moving forward on the Air Force's F-47, and soon the Navy tells us that they will announce their carrier-based 6th Gen fighter. So these are great times for 6th Gen. That is what is going to keep the U.S. military edge, along with space superiority linked in. But put that 6th Gen out there, and that is what will keep the world safe for our Western rules of the road and keep China at bay and deterred.
All right, Rebecca Grant, Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Lexington Institute. Thanks for joining us on this episode of NucleCast.
Thank you.
And thanks to you, the listeners, and we'll see you next time. I always enjoy talking to Rebecca. She's a fount of knowledge. I think I probably met her 15, 20 years ago. It's been a long time, but she knows a lot about stealth. And so it was good to catch up, good to see sort of where everything is, and that, everything's sort of on track. And, I didn't even realize, I don't think I even knew that the B-21 was actually under budget. So that was good to hear. That's a good news story that I don't think is out there enough. So I enjoyed the discussion with Rebecca. Hopefully you did as well.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center, a 501c3 that seeks to educate key decision makers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Krumthal. Help us grow our followers by sharing it and follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast.